We never recover all the oil. Somebody who tells you that's telling you stories. Good conditions, you get half of the oil that hits the water.
Pipelines, for the most part, are out of sight, out of mind. Most communities don't even realize they're there.
Well, this is sort of the cost of doing business. And then we're supposed to be like, oh yeah, I drive a car, so I guess I have to deal with oil spills. Bullshit.
So we're in Glendive, Montana, and right above us is a chopper flown by Bridger Pipelines Company that's doing aerial surveys of the Yellowstone River because on January 17th, a pipeline broke, spilling about 50,000 gallons of crude right there into the river and contaminating the town's drinking supply. We met Paul Peronard, the Environmental Protection Agency's on-site coordinator and a veteran in environmental disaster response. We asked him to take us to the site of the pipeline rupture on the Yellowstone River. We're going down here kind of at the point of this oxbow that's off the main channel, and they found out that there might be some oil down here. So we're gonna go check it out.
Right under the seam of this ice, you have this remnants of it coming up along this stretch. That looks to be oil out of this sheet.
Is that what's giving it that kind of color and like a little bit of shine, or?
Well, so the sheen is definitely coming off of the oil. It'll have that little rainbow iridescent look. So that, by the way, is oily residual right there. What you have there is a mousse. As it weathers, you get a froth, an oil froth off of it. That is pretty common.
How far down have you guys been seeing oil sheen since the spill?
Well, so we have seen sheen the first couple days of the spill as far down as Sydney, which is about 40 miles downriver. But the furthest that we've seen actual oil product is about 16 miles downstream. So a lot of this has already moved downstream, on its way to the Mississippi.
The Poplar Pipeline crosses beneath the Yellowstone River and carries up to 42,000 barrels per day from North Dakota's Bakken region, which has seen an increase in oil production since the shale boom began in 2010. It's unknown what caused the spill, but its impacts are still being felt. A month after the spill, lab tests are showing detectable levels of petroleum in the muscle of fish downstream from the spill. Even though it's hard to see the immediate impacts of the spill beneath the ice, the properties of this lighter Bakken crude make it dangerous. It's more volatile than a heavy crude, meaning its constituents have a greater tendency to evaporate and dissolve. This explains why benzene contaminated the town's drinking water, and the way it evaporates makes it more difficult to clean up. To make matters worse, as the ice begins to melt, it becomes dangerous for cleanup crews to be out on the river as they risk falling through the thin ice.
Just some of the different sorbent materials. We would call this sausage boom. It likes oil, it doesn't like water. So you can put it on the water and it won't soak in water, but it'll soak up oil. And so you have diapers and pads that they use to mop up the oil like they're doing behind us now. They're out there now walking, coring holes and opening up slots, and he's cutting a groove in the ice to drain the oil to a collection spot. So, as you can imagine, I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, plus the support crew over there, guys, chipping holes, trying to cut slots to drain the oil. And we will get, if we get 5 gallons of oil out of there today, it'll be a good day for us. Our production, our recovery of oil out of the water is just, we're not really getting much. We've, 300 and something barrels out of the pipeline in this immediate area, less than a couple of barrels actually out of the water. So pretty much what is in the water is there and going. We aren't going to recover it.
This isn't out of the ordinary for an operation like this?
Well,
you don't necessarily cover all of it, or a majority of it in a situation like this?
We never, and I'll be clear about that, we never recover all the oil. Somebody who tells you that's telling you stories. Good conditions, you get half of the oil that hits the water.
And the spills that you've worked on, have they been pipelines that are pretty old in infrastructure, like all built in the 50s, 60s areas?
So I'm gonna warn you now, I don't get to talk policy, but I will suggest to you that 80% of the pipeline breaks we go are on older lines. If I were king of the world, I'd be replacing pipelines, and if I were the king of the EPA,
But just like
I would be helping people replace pipelines.
Right, but from a management perspective, the pipelines that you've worked on have been
Old
older.
ones, yeah. The old, I mean, that's, we try to do risk assessments and, contingency planning. And the biggest factor for risk is the age of the pipeline. Even though the pipe was upgraded in '72, the crossing itself is from the 50s. We need to make an effort to help replace these older lines. That's where we see the most spills. That's where the risk is. From my standpoint as a spill responder, I'd like to see a lot more newer pipelines because we move lots of oil in this country. I mean, I drove to get up here, right? So you drove to get out here to come talk to me. We need the oil. As long as we do, I would like it in a safer infrastructure.
The United States has seen an increase in pipeline spills. The U.S. Department of Transportation recorded 73 pipeline-related accidents in 2014, an 87% increase over 2009. And this figure could be even higher due to the lag of companies reporting these spills. Bridger Pipelines is the company responsible for maintaining the line that spilled in Glendive. The federal oversight agency, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, also known as PHMSA, issued a warning letter to Bridger last year following an inspection of the Poplar Pipeline. PHMSA warned that Bridger wasn't following safety reporting methods, but didn't fine them despite violations under federal law. Bridger, for its part, defended its practices, saying the 2015 spill had nothing to do with those safety violations. Following what happened in Glendive, Bridger has plans to update pipeline infrastructure.
We will directionally drill under the river at a much deeper depth, and it'll be brand new pipe with the latest materials, the latest coatings, and the latest sensors that you have.
Is it hard to replace new lines?
It's a substantial effort to replace those lines, and in most cases, the lines operate very well with the methods that have been used. This pipeline was considered a medium risk pipeline. The fact that it was built in the 50s and the crossing reconstructed in 1967 is not uncommon in the pipeline industry.
These pipelines were built for a previous boom, and now we're continuing to use them for a newer oil boom. Why don't we have new infrastructure across the board?
That seems to be, at least in my view, a broader policy question that's not really in my purview.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but in my mind, isn't that a company decision? Isn't that a decision that a company would make to meet the realities of an industry? Like, do you have to wait for a government body to say, no, please update all of your pipelines? I mean, wouldn't that be what a company wants to do to be safe and keep up with the new boom?
I still think that's a policy question that's kind of beyond the realm of what I'm able to talk about.
Who actually makes the designation that it is a medium, low, or high risk pipeline?
I believe that designation is made by the government.
Actually, it's the pipeline companies themselves that designate a pipeline's risk, not the government. We headed to Washington, D.C. to find out why the government allows pipeline companies to police themselves.
We're here outside the DOT, the home of PHMSA. I've been trying to speak to them for weeks about pipeline safety and stricter regulations, but they refuse to go on the record.
So we brought the question to Carl Weimer, the head of the watchdog group, the Pipeline Safety Trust, to understand the roadblocks to stricter regulations.
So how is the pipeline industry regulated?
Right now, the regulations are, to a grand degree, left up to the industry to decide themselves. Every company has a different plan. Every company's looking at risk differently. So there's lots of wiggle room in how the companies interpret the regulations. That makes those regulations really hard to enforce, and it leaves way too much up to the industries themselves to decide how they're going to do that.
Why doesn't PHMSA conduct its own inspections on pipeline companies?
Well, PHMSA has about 120 inspectors nationwide for all 50 states, 2.5 million miles of pipelines, so they're spread really thin. So, they don't have the personnel to be out doing all these inspections. So to a grand degree, they've passed it off on the industry, saying, you do the inspections, we'll come in every year or 2 or 3 and try to check your paperwork to see if you're doing it right. And the reality is PHMSA's level of fines they're able to levy on these companies probably isn't really high enough to change behavior much. So to some degree, there's this, how do we work with the industry to try to get them to do the right thing, because we don't have the fining authority to really change their behavior.
Were you surprised to hear about the spill in Glendive?
I was really surprised about that because, you know, the ExxonMobil spill into the Yellowstone River kind of caught everybody's attention, and there was lots of activity in that part, especially on the Yellowstone River, looking at the river crossings. So when another one happened just a few years later, it was pretty amazing that the companies even along that river hadn't learned the lesson yet.
Almost 4 years ago, a pipeline operated by Exxon spilled more than 60,000 gallons of oil near Billings, about 200 miles southwest of Glendive. Alexis Bonagovsky is a farmer whose land was covered with oil when the Yellowstone flooded her property. She's one of the many landowners who sued Exxon after the spill for damages to her farm and her livelihood. Alexis took us to see how close her farm is to the river.
So when the spill happened, what did the Yellowstone look like?
The river came over the banks, which you can see. Basically, it was flowing all through our property, probably 3 to 4 feet. It was kind of the perfect storm. The river flooded the same time the pipeline broke, and we got to keep all the oil on our place. Oh, here you go. It's not much, but you can see where the oil settled.
The marking right there?
The marking right here, that's oil. And that's basically where, when the river went down, there was water left, and everything just kind of settled. And this is about as high as the water was after the river went down.
Alexis's land still isn't back to normal. Since the oil seeped into the ground, it has been nearly impossible to extract. She says that this has been detrimental to her land and to the goats that she raises.
We've had a high rate of mortality in the kids, higher than, you know, normally. A normal year would be like lose 3% of the kids, just for natural, you know, that's just what you lose. After the oil spill, we had like 30 to 40% mortality. And you can't go to like, what do? You go to Exxon and be like, my goats are dying, and you can't prove that it's the oil, but what else changed? Nothing else changed on our farm.
It's never been like this before.
Yeah, we've never had that many kids get lost, and it's been like that every year since the oil spill. We've had like high kid crop loss.
Did Exxon provide any kind of support?
So for a couple weeks, we didn't have anyone on our place. We had no cleanup crews, no remediation. I got sick on that Monday, so it'd been 3 days of being on the farm here, and I had to go to the hospital with acute hydrocarbon exposure, which, you know, our public health agency had been putting out press releases saying that being around oil was just like being sprayed by a skunk, and that there was no public health threat to this oil.
What was your first reaction when you heard about the spill in Glendive?
I wasn't surprised that there was another oil spill.
How come?
Because nothing has changed since the oil spill that hit our farm.
Do you think these spills are just a cost of doing business with old infrastructure?
These oil spills are a cost for someone, but they're not for the oil company. It's a cost for the people who are impacted by it. Yeah, they spend a couple $1 million cleaning it up, and they do it as cheap as they can. And they're preventable. The Exxon oil spill and the Glendive oil spill were completely preventable. And we're the public, we're on the outside going, hey, you need to protect us. And they're like, well, this is sort of the cost of doing business. And then we're supposed to be like, oh yeah, I drive a car, so I guess I have to deal with oil spills. Bullshit.
Keystone XL is being debated, and it's proposed to be just crossing the waterway where there have been 2 major spills in the last 4 years. What do you make of that? Does that concern you?
They can say that we have all of these safety precautions with Keystone, and it might not break under the Yellowstone River. But if it does break, holy shit. All the people saying that it's safe, they don't have to live downstream from the Keystone. And when you don't have to deal with it, you can just, you know, say, oh, it's an acceptable risk. Well, to whom? Who is it acceptable to? It's not acceptable to us.
President Obama's veto of the Keystone Bill and its riders may have given the impression that the pipeline is dead, but the president may still authorize the project, pending the results of the review by the State Department. The Keystone XL would move up to 830,000 barrels of oil a day. That's almost 20 times more than what Bridger's Poplar line moves. any possible spill from Keystone would eclipse the spill we saw in Glendive.
I don't really think the regulations are up to snuff yet for either the Keystone pipeline or all the other new pipelines that are going in the ground, or the existing ones. You know, we keep seeing spills. The goal ought to be zero incidents. Everybody says that out loud, but the industry isn't really doing all they could to make that a reality.
The Bridger spill speaks to the larger issue of pipeline safety in the U.S. The proposed Keystone site is just adjacent to Glendive. Even though the Keystone XL will have newer technology than the Bridger Poplar line, the same issue remains: a lack of oversight by a federal agency already spread too thin. And Keystone is just one part in a web of 2.5 million miles of pipelines in the United States. Unless there's a significant regulatory overhaul, we can expect pipeline spills to continue happening and be accompanied by a week of media coverage, a few calls for change, and more million-dollar cleanups.